It's July 10, 2006, inside a tunnel connecting Interstate 93 to the Ted Williams Tunnel in South Boston. A concrete ceiling panel weighing 26 tons, held in place by nothing but epoxy-bonded anchor bolts, suddenly tears free from the tunnel roof and crashes down onto a car passing underneath. Milena Del Valle, a passenger riding to Logan Airport with her husband, is killed instantly. Her husband, driving, survives with serious injuries. The bolts holding that panel had been slowly creeping loose for 3 years, and engineers had already seen warning signs of the exact same failure 7 years earlier, in 1999, and decided not to investigate further. This is the story of the machines and the mistakes behind Boston's Big Dig, the most expensive highway project ever built in the United States. It started as a scar through the city. Boston's elevated central artery, built in 1959, had become a 6-lane bottleneck that choked downtown traffic and physically cut neighborhoods off from the waterfront. Planners at the time had built it as the cheapest option available, an elevated highway punched straight through the heart of a city whose streets still followed colonial-era paths. By the 1980s, it was carrying nearly double the traffic it had been designed for, and it was congested for as many as 10 hours a day. State Transportation Secretary Frederick Salvucci spent years pushing a radical alternative. Instead of building a bigger highway above ground, bury the entire thing in a tunnel running directly underneath the existing elevated road, all without shutting the old highway down while the new one was built beneath it. Planning began in 1982. Actual construction did not start until 1991. The foundation for that tunnel was borrowed from Italy. Like several major American projects before it, the Big Dig relied on slurry wall construction, the same underground concrete barrier technique used to hold back groundwater and unstable soil elsewhere in American skyscraper foundations. Crews excavated deep trenches along the tunnel route, filled them with a dense clay slurry to hold the walls open, then poured concrete from the bottom up to displace the slurry and create solid, watertight walls keyed directly into bedrock. By 1996, those slurry walls were underway along the length of the I-93 corridor. Forming the shell, the rest of the tunnel would be built inside. Boston's ground made the job harder than most American cities. Much of downtown sits on centuries of fill dumped into former tidal marshland, riddled with old wooden pilings, buried building foundations, and in places, colonial-era debris that surveyors had to map and route around before a single trench could be dug. The hardest problem still had nothing to do with soil. Engineers had to build a wider tunnel directly under a narrower elevated highway that could not be closed. They designed horizontal steel braces spanning the width of the new tunnel, then carefully cut away the original highway's support struts piece by piece, transferring the load of live traffic overhead onto the new bracing system as construction proceeded beneath it. Traffic never stopped moving above a construction site that was, at times, only feet below the pavement. The project wasn't only underground either. Crossing the Charles River required an entirely separate structure. The Leonard P. Zakim Bunker Hill Memorial Bridge, designed by engineer Christian Men and completed in 2003. At the time of its construction, it was the widest cable-stayed bridge ever built, and it remains the visible, photogenic centerpiece of a project that spent most of its budget on work nobody could actually see, buried under the streets of downtown Boston. That budget never stopped growing. The project was originally estimated at $2.6 billion when planning began in the early 1990s. Contractors Bechtel and Parsons Brinckerhoff led the design and construction as a joint venture, with Modern Continental Construction Company handling major tunnel work under the oversight of the Massachusetts Highway Department and later the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority. By the time major construction wrapped up in 2006, the final public price tag had climbed to roughly $14.8 billion. Some estimates, once interest on the bonds used to finance it are included, put the true cost closer to $24 billion, making it, by a wide margin, the most expensive highway project in American history. Rising costs weren't the only warning sign. In 2005, Massachusetts State Police searched the offices of Aggregate Industries, the project's largest concrete supplier, and found evidence that Deliver Concrete had not met contract specifications, some of it substituted with cheaper or improperly mixed material and passed off in inspection reports as meeting the required standard. 6 men connected to the company were eventually arrested on fraud charges. Separately, hundreds of thousands of gallons of salt water were later found leaking into the tunnels every month, corroding embedded rebar and structural steel from the inside. The state's attorney general filed more than 200 separate complaints against project contractors over leaks, cost overruns, and safety concerns before construction was even finished. If this kind of infrastructure history interests you, the subscribe button is right there, and it genuinely helps stories like this reach people who'd want to see it. None of those problems on their own killed anyone. The epoxy did. The ceiling panels in the I-90 connector tunnel were suspended using steel anchor rods bonded into drilled holes in the tunnel roof with a fast-set epoxy adhesive. That epoxy was rated for short-term loads like wind or seismic shock, not for holding 26 tons of concrete in place for years at a time. In 1999, testing revealed 5 bolts had already failed. Project managers chose not to expand the testing program. Investigators later determined the epoxy had been slowly deforming under sustained weight for years, a phenomenon engineers call creep, invisible from the roadway below until the moment it finally let go. At the collapse site, investigators would later find that 20 separate anchors had pulled loose from the tunnel roof. Not just the handful originally suspected, meaning the panel that killed Del Valle had in effect been failing in slow motion for years, before anyone driving beneath it ever knew. The collapse shut down a critical section of the tunnel for almost a year. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded the following July that the accident could have been avoided entirely with proper material selection and monitoring. 4 construction workers had already died during the Big Dig's building phase before the ceiling collapse, and traffic chaos following the closure was linked to at least 1 additional death, a heart attack victim who died en route to the hospital while trapped in the resulting gridlock. Powers Fasteners, the company that manufactured the epoxy, eventually settled with the Del Valle family for $6 million. Bechtel and Parsons Brinkerhoff agreed to a $450 million settlement covering flaws across the wider project, without facing criminal charges. The Big Dig officially closed out at the end of 2007. In its place stands the Rose Kennedy Greenway, a chain of more than a dozen public parks and plazas built on the ground once occupied by the elevated highway, and a newly opened waterfront district, now known as the Seaport, that finally reconnected with the rest of downtown Boston after decades cut off by an overhead roadway. Saltwater corrosion in the tunnels has continued to cause problems for years since, including another ceiling fixture failure in 2011, traced back to the same type of epoxy blamed for the 2006 collapse. The project reduced daily congestion dramatically and reshaped how the city physically works, cutting travel time through downtown Boston substantially during peak hours. It also stands as a case study in what happens when a public agency hands total control of a project's design, construction, and inspection to the same private consortium, with no single person clearly accountable if something goes wrong.